Usually whenever an expansion releases, I wait a couple of days and then I give you guys the top 5 decks in Hearthstone. And I'm still going to do that, except I've got 25 total Hearthstone decks that I believe can not only be fun, but most of these decks are going to be able to carry you to Legend. Before we get started, I just want to give a huge shout out for everybody that has clicked this video so far. Even if you are someone that just comes in, grabs the deck code, you guys are the reason why these videos are so successful. So with those thanks out of the way, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. You guys are already going to hit that like button. You guys are already going to subscribe to the YouTube channel because we have the best decks to be showcasing today. So I'm going to be going over the top 5 best archetypes in Hearthstone, and then I'm going to go over all the other decks that I have prepared in this video. But there are 25 total deck lists that are available in the description below, so make sure if you want to get those deck codes, they are down there for you. So let's go ahead and jump into what I believe is the best deck in the format. It's Handbuff Paladin. I mean, there's really not much to expect here. Handbuff Paladin is by far the best deck in the game. However, I don't believe this is the best version of the deck, but if you want to play Excavates, Habu Gabu's rank 1 version of Handbuff Paladin is probably a solid choice if you just want a simple deck that is going to do one thing: buff cards, win the game with charge damage, and sometimes win with Shroomskavate, Wind Fury. In fact, you're most of the time going to win with this card. Blizzard might need to look into this because giving Wind Fury to Paladin is very, very busted, and this deck is honestly one of the easiest legend grinds that I have seen in quite some time. Now, if you want a different way of playing the list, this is my custom version, my perfect 30 cards that will be posted here if it's not already posted in the next couple hours. So make sure you guys are subscribed, make sure you check out that content. We got plenty of deck guides that will be coming that are not just about good decks, but about fun decks as well. But this is one of the versions of the deck to where I believe is the best way of being able to play it. We've got plenty of card draw with cards like Panner, Instrument Tech, Acolyte of Pain, technically Amethyst if you think about it, because it is card draw, so there's plenty of cycle within this deck. We've got the best Ziliax in my opinion, having Stealth, Elusive, Poisonous, and Reborn, and at the start of your turn doubling the attack, so that way if you ever buff it with cards like from the Virtue or from the Grimescreen Outfitter, then this card can easily double its attack and solo games almost by itself depending on the situation. Tiger's Plushie is one of the best cards from the new set that works extremely well with Deputization Aura. This deck just absolutely slaps and carries, and we've got one Viper as a tech card specifically for the mirror because this will be the most popular deck that you see. But the outfit tailors, the 1-mana deck hands, this just makes the deck really sing and gives us a lot more aggressive tools to end games faster, to where we are most of the time going to end the game by turn 6s through turn 8. So this is probably one of the best decks to be playing. In my opinion, this is the best version of this deck, and go ahead and prove me wrong if you've got a better Handbuff Paladin than me. Go ahead and put it in the comments below, and I will still tear it apart because my deck is better just because I'm the one that built it and not you. But in all seriousness, I really do believe that this deck is really good, and I think that Handbuff Paladin is for sure going to get nerfed if there's any balance patches anytime soon. So play this deck while you can get the free wins. Next up, we have a Nature Shaman deck that I just want to shout out because this is my own version of this list. However, looking at the meta, there might be a few cards that we want to change, so maybe you could do something like this and actually add in Wandmaker, because Wandmaker is a very consistent, very good card to have in this deck as just another 2-drop that gives you value. Maybe we want a second copy of Fairytale Forest, but this deck really doesn't need it because the next deck is probably going to be closer to the perfect 30 list that I would recommend anybody to play if you really like Nature Shaman. Tic Tac's version of Nature Shaman might be the best 30 that I've seen so far because the deck is literally just play cards and wait. So it's just like you play a card, it draws a card, you wait for the flash, you play another card, it draws a card, you wait a turn for the flash, and then you play another card that draws another card, and then you finally play the flash whenever it's ready. And the best part about this deck in particular, Flash, you only need to play once in order to do the OTK. So if you're worried about number 1 not having it, you can play one Flash, see if you have enough damage, and then play the second Flash, but only play that second Flash when you actually have the combo ready to go. You can use one in a tempo fashion in order to actually draw through the deck, or maybe you want to see if you can pop off the combo depending on what your lightning reflexes get you. But be careful about how you use your Flash of Lightnings. This is not a situation like in the previous meta to where there were some situations situations where you just needed one and other situations you needed two. You just need one in order to do the combo, because all the cards like Pop-Up Book, Lightning Bolts, and to a lesser extent Crash of Thunders will still cost 0 mana no matter what. So just play one copy of Flash of Lightning in order to set up the combo. Make sure you have enough spell damage in hand ready to go, and definitely count up how many Lightning Bolts that you have, because it is very important that you do not miscount with this deck. If you miss lethal, people can heal very easily in this meta. So if you miss the damage and you miss the OTK, odds are you will lose the game. But if you want to play Nature Shaman, this is probably the best 30 that I have seen since WHIZBANG'S Workshop has come out. Up next, we have Wheel Warlock, or as I still like to refer to it as Death Clock Warlock, because I just like Death Clock. But regardless, this deck is still really very good if you want to destroy all the control warriors on the ladder, because there is one simple combo that any deck that is control cannot deal with, and even in the mirror is absolutely game-shattering and game-ending. The Doomkin. The Doomkin is Doom King, and when you play this in the mirror immediately into wheel, you just automatically win if your opponent cannot set up a bunch of damage to your face, and odds are you are only going to play the wheel if you have all the cards in your hand that help support it. You still should play the wheel as soon as possible in most matchups, but just be wary that just because you play wheel does not mean that you have an automatic W. Like, if you can't defend yourself, you are just going to die in 5 turns, especially in the mirror when people can make 15 minions extremely easily. But more times than not, the person that plays wheel first is just going to win in the mirror. And of course, in the control warrior matchup, if you play Doomkin on 6, then your opponent is going to be at 6 mana by turn 5, or 5 mana by turn 6, and then you just have the wheel immediately ready to go. So that's almost a turn or two before they can play their Odyn. This is very good against warrior, but kind of like what I was saying earlier, make sure you're aware of how much damage potential that they have, because every now and again you might get scammed if you are not paying attention. But this is still probably one of the best ways of playing Warlock right now, but in my opinion, this is not the best list and is personally not my all-time favorite of all the Wheelock lists that I have seen so far. In my opinion, this version of Wheelock from Corbett Streams is probably the best version of this deck that you can possibly play. I love the pop card in this deck for a little bit of extra lifesteal and removal. The imposing Anubisath is a great way of being able to add extra consistency on your Forge of Wills, because every now and again, like, you just don't draw the Dark Alley Pact, and then you just miss out on that turn 4 Forge value. And having a 7/7 with Taunt is perfect for this deck because you need a lot of sustain and a lot of durability. But one thing I like in particular, I don't know if I talked about the Ziliax in the other deck, but this Ziliax uses Perfect and Copy in order to summon a wall during the turns after you play the wheel, and since that is 9 mana, it actually works perfectly right after you play the wheel. So there might be some situations to where Ziliax might be a little bit up in the air. A lot of people love to shuffle this into the deck, which has a lot of merit to it, but in Warlock in particular, you have cards like Reno, you have Sarg, you have Symphony of Sins to shuffle cards back into the deck, you have a lot of lifesteal. I don't know if you really need the Ziliax shuffling back into the deck in order to be good, so you might as well have Ziliax give you a lot of healing after your wheel as probably the best case scenario for your Ziliax, as well as, you know, pressuring minions and defending yourself very, very effectively. So I feel like if you're going to play Wheel Warlock right now, I would highly recommend this version from Corb, because the other version feels like it's trying to punish more slower decks. This is probably the best version of the deck that is geared towards beating aggro while still being Omega favorite against control, just because Wheel of Death ends the game and casts death on the opponent. Next up, we have the best deck that has the least amount of new cards, because the only new card that really goes into control, Reno Warrior, is Safety Goggles. Like, there's just really not a lot to say about this deck. Warrior feels like it is still one of the best decks in the game because it barely lost anything on rotation. Reno Warrior is almost exactly the same as it was in the previous expansion. In fact, I really can't even think of any of the cards that we lost because this deck just works so freaking flawlessly. What, did we lose an armor card? Did we lose an AoE? I don't know. This deck just still feels insane and still insanely busted, to where there are 2 versions of Control Warrior that are running around right now. One version with the pigs as usual, but this other version of the deck is bringing back an old familiar face. That's right, there are people that are running Ignis yet again with Fizzle, and I really don't understand the reason why this is happening, except maybe we are trying to be more effective into the Control Warrior mirror. That's really all that I have here. I really don't understand why people are playing this deck in particular. Maybe it's trying to bully up Paladins because we do have double Viper in the deck, and according to Warrior players, Handbuff Paladin is actually the hardest matchup that they have to deal with. So the double Viper in this deck is kind of selling me that this is the variant of the deck that people are playing in order to specifically farm Paladins at top legend. So maybe Ignis is there because we sometimes need the tempo that comes from it. Maybe it's like Forge into Ignis on turn 4 into Weapon on 5 in some situations. Most of the time, you're probably just going to go for the 1 mana Wind Fury, but I'm really just trying to think outside the box on why exactly Ignis is seeing play, because I really don't have an answer to this. But this is another deck that Molestar in particular, if you guys watch the Nature Shaman streams, you know who Molestar is. One of the best Control Warrior players that I know. So if he is playing this version of the deck, I 100% trust him, because Molestar, like I said, is one of the best Warrior players that I've ever seen. So if you want a slightly, kind of, maybe not exactly different way of playing this deck, then this is about as different and as spicy as we're going to get, because Safety Goggles was really the only card that Warriors seemed to care about in this particular archetype. So there are 2 more decks that I want to showcase to you guys that I believe are the best 6 decks or best 6 archetypes in the meta, and it was very difficult to come to these last 2 decisions, but I believe that Tempo Demon Hunter is just such an extremely weird situation that we are experiencing in Hearthstone, because like I didn't expect this deck to be good like whatsoever, but it turns out that Tempo Demon Hunter has a lot of promise to where it's kind of being brought down by all of the Paladins at the moment. But if Paladin gets nerfed, this could very easily take Paladin's spot as the best tempo deck in the game, and it's mostly due to this card in particular. So, you know, you discover a card, you get a demon, you set its stats equal to the cost of this minion, but one thing you may not realize is that if you discount this minion, say to 3 mana, then that means that the demon that you discover will also be 3 mana. So people have decided to run Raging Hellscreamer, the Umpire's Grasp, and even to a lesser extent, Wayward Sage, in an attempt to try and discount the Window Shopper to even potentially 0 mana, so that way you can play it for 0 mana, get another demon in hand for 0 mana, and we look at all the demons, there are actually a lot of really good pulls, such as the Eldari Inquisitor, the Mythical Terror, or even the Abyssal Bassist, and pulling out 1 mana copies of Mech is also very good, so there's a lot of synergies and a lot of kind of interesting combinations of demons depending on what mana cost you currently have them discovered at. So make sure that you don't accidentally give yourself a bad taunt if you're just discovering a 1/1 minion, but you might have some insane synergies that happen because of 1 mana Mech. Also, I have this card Golden and I can't play it because it's better to discover it, so that's really sad in my opinion. But regardless, what else can this deck do? It just generates tempo, and honestly, it cheats out any taunt minions, because you could just delete them from the game. Like, they're just gone. They're cheated out of the game is what I meant to say. And then you also, there are some lists that are even running Kayn for one specific reason, and it is due to the Ziliax. This Ziliax is by far the best one for Demon Hunter because you get to summon a really powerful Mech. It's a 5/7 and it doubles its attack, but you may not have noticed one particular card in the deck. The Frequency Oscillator. This is only in the deck in order to discount the Ziliax, so that way you could potentially play him on turn 2. You can play this card on turn 1, coin out a 3 mana 5/7 that if your opponent does not immediately deal with or immediately kill, it will immediately deal 10 damage going into the next turn. That's a lot of immediate damage, which is why I use the word immediately like a million times there. But this deck has a lot of potential. It's got Going Down Swinging to remove the board. There's just a lot of really interesting synergies in this deck, as well as Bartendo Bot in order to draw the Wayward Sage. Originally, people were playing Wolves in this deck, but now that we found the perfect Ziliax, I think that this is just a better way of going about it. But who knows? Maybe Midnight Wolf does actually have a slot in this deck. It just kind of felt like the 31st card in my opinion. So unfortunately, it did find its way out. But Instrument Tech in order to draw the Umpire's Grasp, which is the card that you should mulligan for the most. I've been talking about this deck the most because I haven't made a deck guide showcasing it yet, but I will be playing this deck very soon, and once I have some clips to showcase, I do believe that I can convince you guys that this might be the best version of Demon Hunter. Maybe not the best 30-card version, but this is definitely the best archetype for Demon Hunter, and honestly, it's very refreshing to have a deck like this after experiencing Naga Demon Hunter for an entire expansion. So if you want a fun Demon Hunter deck, and I'd legitimately do say that this is a fun deck, I would highly recommend playing Shopper Demon Hunter. This next deck is actually a secret project that you guys are not allowed to talk about, because this is a deck that was sent to me by someone that's playing at top legend, and they have been primarily only playing Rainbow DK, and this is the list that they settled on in order to specifically beat up on Paladins and Warriors. So if you're seeing a lot of those, which odds are you are if you're a high legend player, this might be the deck in order to play, because it has a lot of sustain, it has a lot of survivability, and honestly, this deck just has a lot of value. Like, it's kind of surprising how good this deck felt, even though it's not like an immediate stat bomb out of nowhere unless you get a really lucky amount of corpses from Corpse Bride. Like, this deck is probably the fairest deck that I've played in this expansion, and it still feels really, really fun. Now, we don't have the Handbuff synergies because, unfortunately, when you're playing Rainbow DK, you have two decisions, or you have two questions to ask yourself. Would you rather spend corpses and play the climactic necrotic explosion, or would you rather play Handbuff? Because unfortunately, you cannot do both. There are just way too many diverting paths with those decks to where you have certain cards that you need to run and other cards you really can't afford to run. So it's just one of those things to where you have to choose to spend corpses or buff your minions. And honestly, I think that both have potential, but I really like the idea of just playing this card, and you just can't play this in Handbuff because it's just a different synergy that you just cannot enable, because we are back to the issue with Rainbow DK not having a lot of corpse spending cards. We have to run cards like Corpse Farm now because it really does juice up the Climactic Necrotic Explosion in a way that we really can't do anymore now that Malignant Horror has been rotated out of the format. So Corpse Farm's not even really a good card in my opinion, but you have to run these cards. One card that I do believe is very good actually, and maybe we start running two of, is Army of the Dead, because this is a very good removal card and it does give us corpses to spend. Not to mention it puts us on the board and it gives us undeads for Acolyte of Death. So this card just seems really, really good in my opinion. But I'm going to be playing a lot more of this deck, and when I get some clips on it, I will definitely make a video about it. But those, I believe, are the best 7 archetypes available in Hearthstone. So now that we've talked about the good stuff, let's talk about the memes. Ooh, buddy, do I love me some memes. And kicking it off in the right or potentially wrong way, if you know my opinion on Reno Warrior, there is a new Reno Warrior, but you know what? The deck actually has lethality now. The deck has a way of being able to win because of Tendies. That's right. The Tendies are actually a consistent win condition because of how many 10 drops are not in the game. And because of Bran being able to double up the Tenedrill's battle cries, like 1 Eye of Chaos gives you 4 Tenedrills if you have the hand space for it, and 4 Tenedrills if you can play them immediately already puts you at an 8 mana spell, so that way the next Tenedrill you play is a 9 mana and 10 mana card. So it's actually kind of crazy how like Bran and the Eye of Chaos play all your Tenedrills suddenly puts you in a very real position of being able to kill your opponent. And this is the very first version of the deck that people were playing in order to try this archetype out. And if you look in the ETC, we have cards like Yogg, we have another Eye of Chaos, and Geppetto, so that way we can choose the right card to give us those last amount of Tendies that we need in the deck. But we've also got a natural Tendie in the deck, so there are some situations to where you don't necessarily need the ETC, but you've got Celestial Projectionist, you've got Zola, you've got a lot of cards that help actually pull off this combo. And with this version of the deck in particular, you have Talon Forge Ring in order to draw your Deep Miner Brand somewhat consistently. And even if you've already drawn your Brand, then you can draw your Eye of Chaos, your Burrow Buster, or even your ETC. So Reno Warrior is looking like it has a little bit of a direction. I still don't like this archetype in general because I just really don't like what Deep Miner Brand actually brings to the game, and I just don't like Reno decks in general. So this is more of just a personal preference, less of a, of a power complaint that I'm making here. But if you want the best version of this deck, then this might be the way of playing it. Tice recently climbed the top 200 legend, going, I believe, 12-3 with his version of Reno Warrior. And the reason why I'm calling it BRB uninstalling is because if I am wrong about Deep Miner Brand actually being a meta-relevant card, and if Reno Warrior is a good deck, then I have a lot of words that I am going to have to eat and own up to, but I want to double down. I want to double, triple, quadruple down on saying that Reno Warrior is not good. And every single time I lose to it, it does, honest to God, feel like a scam. Because this deck just draws very well, and it feels like it always has the brand on turn 6. So if you want to counter this deck in particular, play a lot of Plague DK, but Plague DK is not particularly fun, so it's, up in the air. I do not have Plague DK in this video, by the way. We'll get to that when we get to the DK decks. But yeah, if you want to play Reno, this might be the best way of going about it. The only real changes to this deck, I believe, are the Dirty Rat. There's a lot more removal, a lot more cards that help you draw. There's a Fizzle in here for extra value. But more importantly, Geppetto actually finds his way into the deck. I'm very confused on why Yogg does not find his way into this deck. Not just because, obviously, you can add Tendies into your hand with this effect, but, it's just a good removal tool. I don't know why people aren't actually slotting Yogg into the deck. So if you want an easy card to put into the deck, if you don't like one of these cards, because there's 30 cards, you could easily make a change, put Yogg in there, because I feel like he should be in a Tendies deck, right? The last Warrior deck we're going to go over is honestly another situation that I am very annoyed by, because this deck only plays one new card, and it's Ziliax. And it's not even like that insane of a Ziliax. It's just perfect plus reduce the cost by minions in play. So you can sometimes play this card for 0 depending on the right situation. But this deck I do still like to show off because it's a unique way of being able to play Warrior using Roaring Applause in order to draw through the deck and consistently decking out. So that way you can play Boomboss, you can delete the opponent's deck. But this version of the deck in particular is playing Audio Amplifier for the sole purpose of not only having 11 cards, but also being able to play Boomboss into Zola, just in case you go up against those other decks where you need it. Zola can also be very good at giving you extra Ziliaxes or giving you extra Dirty Rats, depending on the situations that you need certain cards. Or maybe you need to stop a Paladin or an Odyn Warrior from hitting you in the face, so you just generate a bunch of Glacial Shards. I think that Zola has a lot of potential in this particular deck, but there's not a lot of people playing Boom Warrior right now because the other Warrior archetypes are a lot more flashy, probably technically a lot more interesting, and honestly just a lot more powerful. But if you're someone that really loves Boomboss and you want to delete some decks because the Hearthstone designers are too lazy to, then go ahead and play this deck because I believe it is still very powerful. And also, I think it might be the way of beating Paladin if you want to play Warrior, but I'm not certain about the Warrior matchup, so you're going to have to do some experimenting and gather some data on your own. Next up is going to be the best version of what I believe is going to be Face Hunter, because I am very confused that people aren't playing Kill Command. Like, what? Why aren't we playing Kill Command? This is the best card in Face Hunter, and so many Face Hunter decks were not playing this. Like, I just don't understand it. Like, did they forget that RC Rampages is a mech beast? Like, these are technically mechs, but they're also beasts. Like, I am kind of covering it right now, but boop. See, it is a beast, so why aren't we playing Kill Command? It just doesn't make sense to me. So if you want to play Hunter, this is really the only list that I've seen people experiment with. Hunter is just unfortunately only focused on this particular archetype. Big Beasts and King Plush, it really saddens me, does not actually see play, and I've got a golden copy of this card, so Blizzard, make this card good somehow. I don't care. I want to play Hunter solely because I want to play King Plush. And now that I have the King Crush Hero Power, or the King Crush Hero Portrait, I need a reason to play Hunter, Blizzard. So come on. Give a homie some love. Give me a reason to play Hunter and make King Plush actually playable in Hearthstone again. Because unfortunately, from my opinion and from what I'm seeing on ladder, this is the only Hunter deck that I have seen people experiment with. Next up is an archetype that I believe is very powerful and very good, but I personally just have not played it yet, so I cannot use my own experience. There was a day during this meta so far where a bunch of people are playing Highlander Shaman, and honestly, the way that I like to justify it is that Fairytale Forest is amazing in this deck, because imagine being able to play your Holiday by turn 4. Suddenly, being able to nerf this card to a 1/9 doesn't seem that bad to me anymore, because one other synergy that is particularly very good in this deck is when you have Holiday already on the field, you can play the Sand Art Elemental and actually give yourself 2 frogs immediately, and you can do this twice, and you can kind of ramp up the stats on the card. So I kind of like that a lot in order to produce a lot of tempo, and that's just what this deck does. It just generates a lot of tempo. Now, granted, I think that Marut Stonebringer is an absolute, or Stonebinder, is an absolutely terrible card. I think this is the worst Highlander card they've ever printed. It's not even close. It's literally that Excavate Treasure that summons elementals, but with the 7 mana 5/6 body. I don't like it. I don't like this card. Personally, I think you should cut this. You could cut it for literally any card, and I would say it's a better deck. But this is a version of the deck that I have noticed that is really trying to make the Hagatha work, to where you have cards like Pack the House, Shine, or Wish Upon a Star, as well as Giant Tumbleweed as easy cards to make the Hagatha very good. But the issue with this that I have noticed while seeing this archetype evolve is that people are stepping away from this in particular, because if you end up drawing these cards, it's a patches effect. Like, you really don't want to draw these cards, because then your Hagatha just gets strictly worse. So if you don't want to play this version of the deck, there is still one other version that I believe is worth experimenting with. This is probably the most heavy tempo of all the Highlander Shamans that I have seen, to where its curve is a lot smoother and a lot smaller than the other one that we've noticed. And it's going for like typical scams with cards like Greedy Partner, so that way we can maybe get the Holiday out on turn 4 without getting lucky from the location. And actually, the location doesn't even find its way into this deck. Okay, so that's very interesting. But you've got cards like Trusting Companion, Jam Session. You're just going for tempo at the very beginning of the game, and you're just trying to stick things every single turn, and then just kill your opponent with good old-fashioned minions and hitting face. Like Bouncer, for example, is an absolutely fantastic card on this deck, because it just generates a bunch of tempo out of nowhere. You have Ignis possibilities for even more OTK-like levels of damage. Maybe not exactly OTK, but this deck just has a lot of tempo, and it always feels like it's on the board. Again, this card finding its way into the deck, I really don't believe it's the way to go, but hey, if this doesn't find its way in this deck in particular, there's no other Highlander deck it's going to find its way into. So if for some reason you really like this card, go ahead and play it in this deck, but I believe that this is probably a deck you can maybe optimize a little bit. But Highlander Shaman is making a real comeback. It's just a matter of whether or not it is going to stay on top with Handbuff, Paladin, and Warrior being so common. So maybe after some nerfs, this deck is really good. But as of right now, I say it's a pretty decent deck. This next deck is actually an updated version of the Tempo Tendies Shaman that I posted a couple of days ago, but it's got a little bit more ways of being able to stay alive. In essence, this is essentially a control shaman with the Tendies being your win condition. So you have to keep yourself alive, you have to remove every single board, which is why you're seeing a bunch of AoEs and survival tools just being hard slotted into the deck. Originally, I just had like Flash of Lightning plus a couple of nature cards in order to find those key AoEs when you needed them, but it turns out that this deck does need to play like a control deck and keep itself alive, so that way you can play your Shutterwalk, so that way you can play the triple Tendie all in one turn, and you can ramp it up with Shutter Block extremely effectively. But in all honesty, this is very much a meme deck, which is why I'm showcasing it in this part of the video. But if you're someone that really liked this archetype, this might be the perfect 30, because it'll keep itself alive, it'll play for control. It's just a matter of whether or not you're able to ramp up your Tendies fast enough to where they can actually cast the 10 mana spells. And if you can do that, you will win every game, because the 10 mana spells are just extremely consistent. Next up, we have some Death Knight experiments that I want to showcase to you guys, because this is a version of the deck that I was really trying to make work. The only reason why I'm showcasing this after already showing a Rainbow DK that focuses on spending corpses is because I really want to showcase the idea of Dry Scale Deputy. But in all honesty, you don't even want this card to hit the Climactic Necrotic Explosion. You really want this card to hit your cards like Corpse Farm. So maybe there's a way of being able to put in the Army of the Dead, so that way we have even more corpse spending. But this is just another version of the deck that you can try if you are really trying to make Climactic Necrotic Explosion work. I really tried to make Horseman work, but I really don't like this card in particular, and in all honesty, it might just be better to play this card, because you could always discover the Horseman out of it, and there's actually not a lot of Blood Rune cards right now, so this card's extremely easy to get the right card in the right situation. But Headless Horseman has been very much of a failure, in my opinion, in terms of it being a meta-relevant card, because Death Knight simply does not care about value right now. This is not a value-oriented meta. This is a meta that is aiming to kill you, so anything that doesn't actually aim to kill you faster is just going to be a bad card in this particular meta. So unfortunately, the Headless Horseman is not that good of a card, but I couldn't cut it when I was making the deck. So if you really want to go for this line of Death Knight, then go ahead and try out this list. But honestly, I don't have a lot of faith in it. Now, a deck that I absolutely have faith in, maybe not exactly this 30-card version, but I believe there's definitely something here, is the new version that I have dubbed of Rainbow DK with all of the buff cards. And we're not running all the buff cards, because I feel like you just got to focus on one particular synergy. Amateur Puppeteer plus Yellow Yodeler. it's just really good, man. If I could play my Amateur Puppeteer by turn 5 and then immediately on turn 6 play the 1-drop into Yodeler, like, dude, I am yodeling all the way home, dude. It's just super good, and you technically have this high roll of being able to coin this out on 4 and then doing this on turn 5. Oh my god, I haven't done it yet, but man, when I do it, is it going to be good. You have the Rubian Swarm Guard in order to eat up all of those buffs, but the main way that you can win, and I just love talking about this win condition, is using Saloon Brewmaster in a very specific way. The way that you can utilize this card is that you can bounce one of the hero power ghouls, so that way you can get a 1-mana 3/3 in your hand. You can then start buffing it with the Amateur Puppeteer or with the Spellstone, so that way you can make a very large 1-mana charge minion in hand. Then you can essentially give it Wind Fury by playing Sinister Soul Cage and setting up a Ghoul OTK. Now granted, this is not something you need to do every single time, which is why we don't have 2 copies of this card in deck, but it also can technically work with no Muncher if your opponent doesn't have any minions. Well, my opponent's always going to play minions. How do I deal with that? That's why we play the Reska. And this is actually the reason why we've gone into the Rainbow DK variant of this deck, specifically and only because we want the Reska. There are no other blue rune cards in this deck. We want the Reska. We want to be able to steal a minion because it also just works really good with Yelling Yodeler, man. Like, I could not drop this card. I just could not do it. And it also gives me a reason to technically play Rainbow DK. So if you want to play what I believe is the most fun combo, the most fun deck available for Rainbow DK, most likely the most based, dare I say, then this is the best version of Rainbow DK that'll make your opponents most likely laugh if you do the combo correctly. To close out this video, we are going to showcase the worst classes in the game, but they have some really, really cool things that are possible. And this is yet another really goofy deck that was made by Habu Gabu. I don't really know what the general strategy of this is of this deck outside of trying to do a Ziliax scam, which I'll explain here in a second. But this is a deck that is just trying to draw cards very, very quickly, and you're trying to do one thing in particular. You're trying to play a very big Ziliax. You want to play it with Stealth and Reborn, and then that way you stick it onto the field, so that way it doubles up its attack. But because you still have magnetic cards in Rogue, such as Spiders, such as from the Scrap Heaps, there actually are ways in order for this card to get absolutely out of control extremely quickly. Especially if you get a card, if you get the Wind Fury out of this, man. Like, oh Maya Papaya, bro. Like, just Jesus fucking Christ. Is that a lot of damage? So it's just like, this is a very goofy deck. It is not consistent at all. And that seems to be the issue with most Rogue decks right now, is that they are just extremely, like, just scam-oriented, where they are really good or very, very bad. There is no in-between with Rogue decks right now, and I just wanted to make sure that I showcased this particular opinion, because there's one person on my YouTube videos that keeps saying, please play Rogue, please play Rogue. I want a Rogue deck. Well, Rogue, unfortunately, is in a very bad position, as well as some of these other classes that I will be showcasing. But if you want a way of actually making this combo work, then maybe you can play some pretty big Ziliaxes in Mech Rogue. But if you're someone that wants a deck that's a little bit, you know, I guess better and maybe more in line of trying to win some games, then you can go with this deck that a lot of people were playing at the very beginning of the season, with Gaslight, Gatekeeper, and Giants being the primary way that you win. I still believe that we want a Sonya in this deck one way or another, so we can copy up cards like the Spark Bots, like the Break Dances. We can just always keep cards on our hand to make the Gaslight Gatekeeper feel a little bit better. I don't know. I'm not a Rogue expert, and honestly, I kind of gave up on this deck after the first day, but Everything Must Go is a card that a lot of people enjoy, especially if you are a Miracle Rogue gamer. But unfortunately, the issue with Rogue right now is that it draws, it sets up a board, but if you deal with that board, it doesn't really do anything else, and you're not always guaranteed in order to get those gigantic boards every single game. Because if you don't get the Gaslight Gatekeeper, this deck just falls apart. So unfortunately for Rogue, all the decks that have been made so far seem to be scam decks or very, very specific niche decks that have to do one thing to be powerful. And unfortunately, in this meta full of hand buff consistency and lifesteal pulling you back from the brink of death, a deck like this just cannot really thrive. Next up, we have a version of OwlTK Druid that I believe is the best version of this deck. And honestly, I don't think it really says a lot to say this is the best version of this deck, because this deck is very, very bad. Like, oh my god, I just don't know how exactly we put this deck together, because unfortunately almost every single Druid deck that I've seen is almost exactly like this. It's trying to make ENR work, it's trying to make the Owl work, it's trying to make Cover Artist work with these cards, because the biggest issue with all the cards that are available for Druid in Whizbangs Workshop, Jades, no one's playing Jades. I've literally not seen this card yet. We've got a spell damage card, tradable card that refreshes mana, combo card, spell damage card, spell damage card, spell damage card, spell damage card, and a meme card. If spell damage Druid wasn't gonna work, then yeah, of course Druid wasn't gonna have a playable deck this expansion. It looks like the best way to play Druid right now that is not playing some kind of Owl combo is going to be either straight up Dragon Druid like we were playing in the previous expansion, or Reno Druid. Those seems to be the only Druid decks that even seem remotely playable, because Nourish being gone just absolutely kills Druid. I just don't know what else to say, man. Like, Nourish enables all of these really, really heavy decks to where you can maybe make Alonius cost 6 mana and it's probably still fine. That's a very, very ballsy take, because you could still discount it with like Summer Flower Child and Smallin. But it's just like, I don't know like what this deck needs in order to be good. It's just way too slow. It doesn't even beat Warrior, when theoretically this should be the Warrior counter. It's just really sad that Shattered Reflections isn't even a card anymore. Like, this card just isn't really a card anymore, because for Druid, they don't really have a card that they want to make copies of on the field or add copies into their deck. So it's just like Shadow Reflections essentially got deleted because of the nerfs, but it also, even if it was unnerfed, you could still use it on the Owl and you could still use it on the ENR, but that doesn't really help what this deck is trying to do, unfortunately. It's got way too many pieces that are required in order for this deck to be good. You need the ramp, you need the win condition by ramping up the spell damage. Like, this deck has just way too many moving pieces, and that is exactly why I just put Smallin in the deck, so I can just mulligan for this card, and I can make my Flower Child's 4 mana. I can make the Doomkin's 5. Like, I really feel like Smallin has to be the way to make this combo work, because unfortunately for Druid, it just does not have sustainability, which is why you have to run Yogg as a pseudo AoE. You only have one healing card with Frost Lotus Seedling. Like, I'm legitimately thinking that we need to unnerf Pendant of Earth, because Druid just has no survivability right now, which is why they probably gave this card armor to begin with. They weren't thinking about the meta where this was broken. They were thinking about the meta in the future, and this card actually being played more times than not, because this card is just unplayable now. So Druid is absolutely drowning. It is dying. I don't even have Innervates in this deck, because again, there are just way too many pieces that we have to put in here. Lifebinder's Gift can discount Funnel Cake, but we only got one Funnel Cake, so it's like, I don't even know, dude. But yeah, Owl Druid is unfortunately a bust. It is a fun deck when you get this thing to work, but man, does it not work consistently. Next up, we have the Priest archetypes, because I honestly didn't want to play a lot of Priest, and I still don't want to learn Overheal Priest. This deck is it's just a really difficult deck, and I don't know why I don't want to put myself through the headache of actually learning it. It's a fun deck. It seems like a great way of being able to actually play a fun Priest deck that isn't just clearing boards and stalling out the game and playing the grinder play style, just waiting for your opponent to end the game. But this is just one of those decks that is very, very consistent if you know exactly how to milk the Hedanis for everything that he's worth. Because you have so many cards like Flash Heal, Funnel Cake, you have cards that come from the Careless Crafter that give you 0 mana bandages, so there's a lot of Gaslights in Hedanis. But from what I've seen with Overheal Priest in particular, you either go with the Dragons or you go with the Hedanis OTK. I don't believe people are having success combining both decks. So if you're someone that wants to play Hedanis, this is probably the way to play the deck. But if you're someone that really wants to make the Time Grinder work, then this is probably the way to play it with the Dragons. Dreamboat is another way of being able to add extra value on your Clergy turns, especially after you play a Funnel Cake, so there's a reason why there's one copy of that. But in all honesty, Overheal Priest was like the most popular deck during the first day of the expansion, but then this deck quickly fizzled out because unfortunately the Warrior matchup is very much a difficult matchup for this deck. It's very difficult for this particular Priest deck to deal with the Warrior armor, because the thing about Zarimi is that it's really broken to skip a turn, but if you don't have a big board with a lot of damage, then there's not really a lot of things going on. But one thing that I do want to point out before moving on to the next deck is that there was a chump list that actually tried to make Storm Giants work. And I think this is a really hilarious gimmick because some people are playing Ignis in this particular deck, but this is an actual way of being able to set up an OTK-like board with Zarimi if you do have a bunch of 8/8s on the field. And I thought Drifters maybe could be enough in order to get us there with like an OTK, but you have to make too many copies. It being at 4 attack is already difficult in order to deal with the armor decks. So maybe you can also run like the giant, the 20, yeah, this one. Like, I just think this is way too inconsistent because this card is a dead card on draw, and you really need things to get out of your hand when it comes to Overheal Priest. So unfortunately, this deck is not really the greatest, but if you want a reason to play your Dragons and Priest, this is probably the way of doing it, but unfortunately, Overheal Priest seems to be getting worse by the day. And last and most likely least, Mage really didn't get a lot from this expansion, is Sif Mage. Like, Sif Mage is still making a way on the meta right now because it is a way of being able to deal with warriors if you know what you are doing. But unfortunately, Handbuff Paladin absolutely slaughters this deck. Like, oh my god, does it get slaughtered. And Mage really didn't get that many new cards from the expansion that they're actually using. Like, Spell Mage was just a bust. I just don't even understand really what the deck is trying to do, because it is drawing cards and discounting them by turn 6. I just don't understand what this deck is really going to do very well. I think Mage just needs more spells before this archetype can be good. Puzzle Master Khadgar is not the nuts card that I thought it was, because the way that I can describe how exactly this weapon works is that it discovers a card, except you don't get to see the options, and then it plays it. It discovers from like a couple of different cards that maybe could be useful in your situation, and then it'll cast it randomly. So in a situation to where you need like a Blizzard, for example, it's not going to cast Blizzard automatically, which is why I believe that people think this card is just automatically bad. And unfortunately, I think it's kind of bad too. Like, random spells that don't impact the actual game state doesn't really make this card feel good, in my opinion. However, one card that I feel like should be more better, but unfortunately isn't for some reason, is actually the Sleet Skater. This card being able to freeze a minion and then gaining armor equal to its attack. Like, if I freeze an 8/8 and gain 8 armor, that seems really, really decent to me. But unfortunately for Mage, it is just way too slow. It has no archetype that really works outside of Sif. Secrets are a bust. Spells are a bust. There's no Tempo Mage that is trying to work. There's no Freeze Mage possibilities, I don't even think, in Standard right now. Do we even have, like, we have Frostbolt, right? We have Frostbolt, but it's like we don't really have anything else. So it's like we can't play Tempo Mage. Warrior's way too common. Paladins absolutely destroy us. Cosmic Keyboard doesn't even find its way into most decks anymore. So it's just like, I don't even really know how to save Mage right now. Like, these cards are good, but it just feels like Mage is always Omega unfavored into the meta that has developed. It just doesn't beat Warrior. It doesn't beat Paladin. I don't know what Mage beats, and I'm very surprised that it doesn't have the worst win rate. Like, Druid has the worst win rate. So, I don't really know how to save Mage, but it's really, really sad to me that all we are doing is just playing Sif with, like, the 5th different flavor on top of it. Like, Sif, this card is never going to get nerfed because it's quite literally the only good card that Mage has right now. Oh boy, that was a lot of decks that we talked about. That was the 25 decks of this expansion, and you better be playing the good ones soon because we have no idea when the bounce patch is going to be hitting. But usually a bounce patch happens within the first week or 2 of an expansion. Just depends on how problematic some of the decks are. And honestly, Paladin might be getting to that position where it is becoming problematic, and we might need to do something. So play these decks, have fun on the ladder, get those legend ranks that you want. Let me know which one's your favorite down in the comments below. If you're one of those rare individuals that actually made it to this part of the video, go ahead and put a heart in chat. Go ahead and do something in order to let me know that you made it to this part of the video, so that way I can say thank you. Thank you for making it to this end of the video, because it means that this content is going to be pushed more to other people on YouTube. So guys, hope you enjoy the decks. Seriously, let me know if you end up playing one of these decks. And as always, thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and we'll see you for the next one.